대한의사학회 봄철학술대회 와주신 걸 감사합니다. Thank you for coming to the 33rd annual Spring Conference of the Korean Society for the History of Medicine. My name is Jane Kim. I'm the moderator for this event. The title of today's conference is The Present and Future of Medical Humanities in East Asia, Perspective for Future for Networks and Exchange. 네트워크와 교류를 본 동아시아 의료인문학의 현재와 미래로 오늘 주제가 학술대회를 하겠습니다. So we have four great speakers lined up for today, but before the event, we'll have an opening speech by Professor Kim Taekjoong of the Inje University. He is the president of the Korean Society for the History of Medicine, and he's also the chair of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences and Medicine at Inje University. He is a leading scholar of medical humanities in Korea, and his interest lies in the cross merger of medicine and philosophy, and medicine and societal relations. He has published numerous works in the post-liberation the Korean medical system, and he has a medical system and the adoption of the American medical system in Korea. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Kim Taekjoong.
예, 방금 소개받은 대한의사학회 회장 김택중입니다. 우선 멀리 대전까지 와주신 여러 선생님들께 감사의 말씀드립니다. 우리 학회의 총무이사님의 노력에 힘입어서 사상 초유의 이렇게 큰 공간에서 학회를 개최하게 된 것을 굉장히 영광으로 생각하면서 한편으로는 제가 좀 울렁증이 있어가지고 이렇게 넓은 공간에서 얘기를 하려니까 좀 떨리네요. 우리 학회 이번 주제가 네트워크와 교류로 본 동아시아 의료인문학의 현재와 미래입니다. 이게 의사학회와 의료인문학이 도대체 무슨 상관관계가 있는가 그래서 조금 좀 의아하게 생각하시는 분들이 있을 텐데요. 우리나라 사실은 알고 보면 우리나라 광복 이후에 의과대학의 의료인문학의 역사가 사실은 의사학에서부터 출발했다고 봐도 과언이 아닙니다. 그만큼 의사학과 의료인문학이 긴밀하게 연결이 되어 있습니다. 그리고 또 더욱이 현재에는 의료인문학이 의과대학 평가 인증 기준하고 맞물리면서 임상의학, 기초의학 외에 의료인문학이 크게 이제 세 가지 축 중에 하나로서 교육 과정을 담당을 하고 있습니다. 그러다 보니까 의사학회에서도 의사학과 연관된 이제 의료인문학을 교육한다던가 또 이제 연구하는 것에 또 신경을 쓰지 않을 수 없는 그러한 상황이 됐습니다. 그래서 오늘은 이제 한국뿐만 아니라 중국, 일본, 싱가포르의 의료인문학 관련된 선생님들을 모시고 각 나라의 이제 의료인문학의 현황을 좀 살피는 이러한 시간을 좀 마련하게 됐습니다. 그래서 오늘 각 나라의 이제 동아시아죠. 동아시아 각 나라의 의료인문학의 현황을 좀 들으시고 또 이제 궁금한 것은 활발하게 좀 토론해 보시는 그러므로 해서 한국에서 의료인문학이 어떠한 방향으로 가야 될 것인가 또 어떻게 이제 노정을 해야 될 것인가 이러한 얘기들을 좀 생각해 보시는 그러한 계기가 되었으면 하는 바람이 있습니다. 네, 그럼 오늘 인사말은 이것으로 마치도록 하겠습니다. 다시 한번 대전까지 와주신 선생님들께 감사의 말씀드립니다. 고맙습니다.
아무래도 시간상 제가 지금 발표하시는 분들의 양력이나 이력을 한국어와 영어로 하기에는 너무 시간을 끌 것 같아서 정말 죄송하지만은 제가 일단 영어로만 이분들을 소개를 하겠습니다. So our first presenter is Professor Sungmin Choi. He's currently an associate professor at the Institute of Humanities, Kyung University, and also the vice director of the HK Institute for Integrated Medical Humanities at the same university. He's active as a literary critic and engaged in the study of expanding and engaging the public in medical humanities through media, narrative text, and technology. His work includes the first monograph, The Modern Media Text and Media Technology, as well as numerous third articles through which Professor Choi has engaged in dialogue with the readers. Professor Tatsuya Mima, are you here?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. So our second speaker is Professor Tatsuya Mima, MD, who is a sociologist, neuroscientist, and a board-certified neurologist. He graduated from Kyoto University School of Medicine and earned his PhD in brain pathology from Graduate School of Medicine, Kyoto University, the same university. He has served in a number of positions, including he's also the director of the Institute of Arts Vivendi at Ritsumeikan University. His academic service includes serving as president of Japanese Society for Health and Medical Sociology, board member of Japanese Association for Bioethics, and counselor of the Japanese Society of Clinical Neurophysiology. He has published a number of publications, including his most recent publication, Clinical and Biopolitics Society and Sociology of Medicine, and numerous essays as well. Please give a warm welcome to our second speaker, Professor Tatsuya Mima.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm Tatsuya Mima from the Ritsumeikan University, Kyoto. So you can see that our building is something like a half round shape. So today I will talk about our research and education activities in the Seizongaku Kenkyusho, which means that Arts Vivendi Institute or something like that. So it's the study of the Seizon. I'm not sure whether that the Seizon is also used in the Korean language or not, but anyway, I'll start. So today I will talk about two things. Okay. So at first, I will introduce our research activities in our institute at first, and the second part, I will talk about our archiving study with respect to the what medical humanities can do for the future. So at first, I will introduce our research institute. Our research institute, Seizongaku Institute, is one of the branch of the Ritsumeikan University, and the meaning of Seizon in Japanese is living and surviving. And our approach is something starting with the experience of many of the Earth's encounter over a lifetime. So that means disability, aging, illness, and bodily or mental differences, including Shoro Byoi. So it's come from the Buddhist word Shoro Byoshi. So in Buddhist terminology, it's disability, aging. This not the disability, living, aging, disease or illness, and death. But we are thinking about life. So we are starting with the experience of the disability, aging, illness, and bodily or mental differences. So our scope is, I believe this is something related directly to the medical humanity approaches, that our scope is not limited to the medical or welfare system, but we study everyday life with illness and the ingenuity of working and living with disability, and the voices emerge as people face aging and death. It's a source of a practical way to thinking about society. So for that reason, we value knowledge grounding in real-world settings and aim to be a hub, a kind of network, center of network, where researchers and people with lived experiences, or practitioners and the public, think and learn and communicate together. And through these collaborations, we seek to co-create the insights that help us live well here and now. So our activities so far, we started this activity from 2007. So it's more about 20 years ago. And I have been involved in this research institute for 10 years. And many visiting researchers were hosted over the 400 symposium seminars, and our specialty or our feature Our special feature is that the voices of people living with disabilities are the center of our research activities. So we are the academicians or academic researchers, but we bring together researchers and medical welfare professionals in the practitioners, and students and community members also, to make a dialogue with the society. And we also place strong emphasis on international exchange, including Asia, Europe, and beyond. So our activities are something like this. So this is the number, so we can skip these. Yes. So our activity is that with the 4 key activities. The first is connecting record to the future. So it's kind of archiving. So I will talk about this later in detail because we think it's related to the medical humanities in a very deep way. And the second part is the connecting across borders. So East Asian Center for the Arts Vivendi. So that means that we are having the strong connection with disability movement in Korea and China and Taiwan. And thirdly, the social design that leave no one behind. So we are doing the research and action research, mainly the action research in the assistive technology development, including the wheelchair, including the wheelchair, and also for the accessibility in the information. And the fourth part is more like publishing. So, but to communicate through books, we are trying to trying to publish books about our studies. Although we are publishing mainly in Japanese and some part in English, but we are doing that kind of way. And for the future, we are doing the archiving study. We are thinking that archiving studies, archiving study is very important for the advancement of the medical humanities. So we have collected a wide range of materials over many years and archived the disability movement and publication by disability organizations and documents of medicine and welfare. So it's not about the books, but more like a kind of a newsletter of the small communities. So if we do not archive those memoirs, those papers will go away in 10, 20 years. To make the things go forward, we are making a database with key materials to make them available online, at least for the list. And wherever possible to that more people can use these valuable resources. We are also registered under the Japanese Copywriting Act as an institution. That means we can upload the text, all the text, all the important text to the website because we have a lot of we have a couple of people with disabilities in the site and also disability in the site or hearing. That means that usual textbook or the book style usual paper books cannot be used for those people with disabilities. So we can officially upload the text with those important material. And another topic we are focusing on is that connection or the network activities. At least for these 10, 20 years, we have been trying to make a connection with the network with the disability movements, but those disability movements becoming more and more officially organized into that academic in the academia. So nowadays, for these 5, 6 years, we have been doing the International Disability Studies Seminar every year in the East Asia. It began 2010 through the collaboration with the colleagues in Korea. But it was more like not a university, but more like a community. So China joined after 4 years, and Taiwan joined 2015. And with these 4 regions, we have the seminar for annually. But we are having the difficulty in continuing this seminar because of various political situations right now. And distinctive feature, we are thinking that the interpretation among Japanese, Chinese, and Korean, and enabling the participation even for those that are familiar with English. This policy is chosen because that I believe that most of the researchers in the university can speak English or at least write English or read English, but most community people in the disability movement or some kind of patient movement cannot read English fluently. That's the reason why we choose to use that mother language for this kind of seminar. And nowadays, for 2 years, it's become more and more easier because of the AI. For example, in this case, that in this workshop, you use that organizer use the event chat, which is that a kind of AI translation system. So I think the communication between across the national border, is becoming more and more easier nowadays. And another topic we are doing the kind of the actual research is that assistive technology. So at first we are using that by including that wheelchair users, even in wheelchair users, we have had many concerns from the people with disabilities about participation in the meetings. So we are doing the research for all the everyday problem, visible and co-design solutions with the people affected. So collaboration with the people who are affected, or people with disability, or people with some kind of disease or illness, is a very important aspect of medical humanities in the future, we believe. So, from this perspective, our approach is to treat the university campus as a miniature city. So we conduct field surveys or actual research on mobility in campus and station, and we host wheelchair tryout events in a kind of open campus. And in partnership with wheelchair manufacturers, designers, and academic societies, we propose lifestyle in which wheelchairs are naturally integrated into their life. Because in the city or in the real world, it's a little bit difficult, but in the campus, university campus is a little bit easier to intervene into the change in the mobility, increasing or enhancing the assistive technology or increasing the mobility in the campus is a little bit easier compared to the real world. So we think that the university campus can be used as a kind of model case for the change in the society. No, not good. And the books, I will skip mostly for this because these are in Japanese publishing. But anyway, we are publishing the research in progress in the web and also in the books. So I will skip this because it is Japanese way. And we have 2 journals also. One is that the Ritsumeikan Vivendi Research Journal, with a peer-reviewed journal in those kinds of disability centered, but any type of medical humanity can be accepted. And another one is that I would like to put stress on this because the Vivendi journal was which is that English-based peer-reviewed e-journal launched in 15 years ago. And this journal welcomes submissions from around the world on disability, aging, illness, or differences. Not only from the perspective of the medicine, but also for any type of approaches like sociology or the bioethics or whatever. So it can be a kind of a good platform for the medical humanities in the based on the English language. And it aims to be a platform not only for researchers, but for patients, families, and care providers. And also we are doing that the web activities. So it's called rsv.arsvi.com. So this can be, this has a long history of 25 years ago, and it has a lot of data, a lot of information, including the disability and illness and some kind of research activities. Mostly in English, but some part is written, translated into English and Korean and Chinese, but those translation activities become a little bit lower right now, but I think we can do that. Translation activity can be done on the AI base. So, in sum, our activity in the institute is that mainly we will go into the second topic. Our activity currently is that mainly on the archiving project. So, but this is not a user archiving, or more like a minority archiving we call. Our project, because our project examines minority archives as both the epistemic and ethical project. Because the recording is not just academic studies, but has some part of the ethical aspect. Because our project situates archiving within the broader questions of power, knowledge, production, and subjectivity in the humanities and social sciences. So the background of our activity is that in research on illness, disability, and minority groups, primary materials are highly fragmented because that they are dispersed across multiple disciplines such as sociological interview research, quality-based, quantitative researches like interview data, or the historical record, and medical record, and welfare studies or welfare record, or social work record or something, and autobiographic narrative can be found in bookshops or whatever. So those data are dispersed across multiple disciplines, and this fragmentation makes it very difficult to construct a coherent understanding of the minority experiences, because it's a multifaceted experience. And furthermore, quantitative and qualitative data are often separated and lead to a loss of context and interpretive richness. This is also true for all the types of archives, but for the minority archives or data of the minority, it's very profound. So we think for these studies on that include the whole, understanding the wholeness of the experience lived by the people with minorities, we need the interdisciplinarity. So to overcome this fragmentation, interdisciplinary integration is essential. So it is not sufficient to simply gather materials. We must also reflect theoretically on how they are connected. And the methodology, bioethics, and philosophy are particularly important to analyze the hybridity and complexity of the minority experiences. Thus, the goal is both empirical integration, and conceptual reflection on knowledge production. So this is a bit abstract. So I'll go into a little bit in detail. While we are thinking in this way, because archiving the ethical project, because historically the act of recording minority groups has often been linked to the governance of those groups or the surveillance of those groups, operation and social control of the small minority people, including a disability and people with illness. or patient group. For example, the Hansen disease research or the recording or the archiving of the Hansen disease patient linked to the governance of the patient, surveillance, and operation. And this has been strongly criticized in disability movement, encapsulated in the slogan, "Nothing about or without us." Therefore, archive or record, or even the studies must be understood as a site of the power. So they require reflexivity regarding who records and what is recorded and how those records are used. A kind of not only the scientific or the medical question, but also for the ethical or the political question. So we are doing this kind of research in a reflexive way. So this project, our project aims to construct interdisciplinary archives of minority experiences. At the same time, it seeks to reevaluate the meaning of archiving performance or archiving studies itself. So archiving, that means archiving is not neutral. It is a practice that shapes knowledge and social relations. So collaboration with stakeholders, including minority communities, is essential for ethical meaningful archivings or even researches. So we think at first part, the important point is that our research activities in the university is always collaborating with stakeholders, including the community. And the second point we are thinking important is the open science approach. So in recent years, open science approach has been emphasized in the not only in the science, the hard science, but also for the social sciences. And archives are seen as a kind of infrastructure that enable knowledge sharing and data use. However, that openness also introduces the ethical tension because that question of privacy, especially for the minority groups, and ownership and consent and control become especially important when dealing with minority data. So we are trying to propose a guideline for archive minority groups. These are our main research activities for these 3-4 years. So it is a tension between the collecting the data and archiving the data of all the type, and also the safe for the privacy and information control right of the recorded people have some tension, and we are trying to make this tension a little bit softer. So I can keep this, but minority archives and ethics is an important part. I would like to stress that minority-related data are often small in scale but highly diverse in content and format. What I had been talking, and they include document, interviews, audiovisual material, oral history. Because of this diversity, we believe that archival process cannot be outsourced entirely to professional archivists. So we have some tension with the archivists, professional archivists, because that professional archivists, they want to archive everything, but it's a little bit difficult for us to say yes to them. So researchers must be actively involved, and ethical considerations such as how those minority groups are represented and how the informed consent was taken and the interpretation of the data, how it should be central. And from this perspective, we are archiving records related to the by using this kind of guideline, we are archive the records related to the eugenic protection law and the history of the forced sterilization or imposed persons with disabilities. This is a kind of a case study on how that the recording and the ethical consideration can be integrated into one study, one research activity. So from this perspective, we are proposing the 5 axes of the minority archive. This is also can be axis for archiving in general, but for the archiving of the minority group data, these 5 aspects are important. At first is collecting. This is in general, searching for and gathering material that goes with dispersed field, and preserving. This is also in general. And the third point is a little bit different from the user archiving, because usage, the applying archiving in research and also for social context is very important for this type of approach. And narrate is enabling the individual, the community to tell their own history. This is important, a kind of the empowerment of the community is one of the important axis of our research activity. And organizing that, this is also very important for in archiving in general. So the third and fourth point, when using the archives, we are thinking about the social context. And also, we use the archives to make the community to the empowerment or narration. Narratives are important for those activities. So conclusions of our archiving activity. I think archiving activity can be an infrastructure of the medical humanities, and those axes I focused would be important for the medical humanities in general. So this project proposes a new form of the archival study that goes beyond the professional management, and it emphasizes the reflexivity, interdisciplinarity, and ethical engagement. And minority archives challenge the dominant forms of knowledge and representation by foregrounding the marginalized voices. So I said it in narrative. And ultimately, they open new possibility for collaborative researches and critical inquiry. And finally, the social transformation. I'm sorry for I cannot attend the general discussion because I made the schedule messed up. Sorry, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Mima. That was a great presentation, and there's a lot of thought-provoking questions regarding both minorities and how do you actually create an archive. So it's the 3:21 and the first session is over, but I think we do have a time for maybe a question or two. 질문, 제 생각엔 한두 개 정도는 좀 받을 수 있는 시간이 되는 것 같은데. 질문 있으실까요?
Thank you for the insight presentation on the Research Institute, Professor Mima. I'm Nami Lee from Ewha Women's University in Korea. I actually have a brief question for you. I understand that the institute primarily focuses on collecting data. The institute primarily focuses on collecting data, organizing academic conferences for knowledge exchange, and disseminating knowledge through various publications. As a fellow theorist who constantly grapples with these issues, I'm curious about how these efforts actually reach the people directly involved or affected by the research. You mentioned that the campus serves as a miniature city for various experiences and studies. I would like to know if there are specific areas where you are considering connections to the local communities or practical policymaking or so. Thank you.
So that originally our research institute had a strong connection with two social movements. The one is the patient movement of the ALS. ALS is a severe neurological disorder who eventually, those people cannot move at all, and if they want to live longer, they have to use the ventilators. So we have a strong connection with those patient activities because that is partly because that one or two are the postdoc students were the carers of those patients. And the second social movement we are having the strong connection that DPI or the Disability People Initiative or something like that. So those people, this is also for those disability some of the young disability activists were postdoc students of our institute. That's why we have the strong connection with those social activities. And from that that was start point, and we have a lot of connections with those minority groups with some difficulties in the bodily or the mental difficulties. That is how the story begins. Thank you.
잠깐 제가 요약을 하면은 한국어로 요약을 하면은 이제 그 이남희 교수님 같아서 선생님의 질문은 이 지금 같아서 이 리츠메이칸 이 연구소에서 같아 발행하는 것들 이제 저널 출간이라든지 이런 걸 통해서 이런 사회적 같아서 소수자 같은 이런 것 같아서 이제 소통을 시도를 한다고 하셨는데 이게 과연 이 같아 그 해당 당사자에게는 얼마나 이게 돼서 이게 관련이 있는가 관계가 있는가 이제 그 질문을 하신 것 같아 맞죠? 네 이제 그리고 이제 그때서 미마 교수님의 대답은 그래서 이게 ALS 그이 연구소에서 하고 있는 프로그램 그 두 가지 그러니까 ALS 같은 그 환자들을 위한 것과 그다음에 이제 장애 가들을 위한 프로그램을 통해서 이제 활발한 같은 소통을 시도하고 있다. 이제 그런 대답이었던 것 같습니다. 네. 그래서 벌써 이제 시간이 지금 3시 25분이어서요. 제 생각 이제 휴식 시간을 가질 것 같은데 저희 Thank you very much, Professor Mima. That was a really great presentation, and hopefully we could see you sometime in future. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's 3:40 now, so we'll begin. 시간이 이제 3시 40분이어서 이제 두 번째 세션을 시작하겠습니다. So, hope you guys have had a break. And it's 3:40 now, so we'll begin our second session. Right. The first speaker of our second session is Professor Michelle Chiang. Professor Michelle Chiang is Assistant Professor of English at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. She coordinates the NTU Medical Humanities Research Cluster and co-chairs the Medical Humanities Curriculum Working Group at the Lee Kong-chian School of Medicine. Her interdisciplinary research focuses on how narratives shape ethical understandings of care. Her recent publications include Prosthesis Refusal and the Ethics of Care in J.M. Coetzee's Slow Man, and The Weight of the Words is a Human Relationality in the End-of-Life Memoirs. Her forthcoming monograph, Mothering Care in the Contemporary Novel Unknown Others, Imaginative Labor and the Ethics of Care, which is to be published by the Edinburgh University Press in 2026, explores how literary representations of mothering care offers insight into the ethical complexities of caring for distant others, particularly individuals whom caregivers know little about and for whom empathy alone may not lead to meaningful or responsible actions. The title of Professor Chiang's presentation today is rather provocative. Medical Humanities in Singapore, Acquiescence or Resistance? Please give a warm welcome to Professor Michelle Chiang.
Thank you. I'm having a little bit of technical problem. I am not sure why I can't see my screen when I share screen with you. So can I just present this way? Are you able to see my slides this way?
Let me try to see if I can expand this.
Alternatively, I could present on my iPad. I'm so sorry. I have no idea what's happening. This is the first time this is happening.
Okay, the audience, they're fine with the screen the way it is. It's actually pretty expand. It's a huge screen, so they can see it.
Okay.
So, yeah. Okay.
All right. Let me check my slides. Okay, all right. Okay, cool. Thank you, everybody. All right, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. So let me begin with a small confession. I teach in, oh, wait a minute. I need to turn on my video. I am so sorry.
Take your time.
Okay. You can't see me, right? Can you see me now? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Okay, so let me begin with a small confession. I teach in both the English literature department and a medical school. So from time to time, I stand in front of future doctors and ask them to spend quality time with stories, patient stories, and doctor stories, and sometimes a painting. As you can imagine, this is not always an easy sell. My teaching experience at the medical school taught me that there are different kinds of silences in medical humanities classroom. There is the silence of boredom, which is painful but useful information. There is the silence of resistance, where students are not yet convinced that the material deserves their attention, but there is also another kind of silence, the silence that comes when something has unsettled habitual assumptions. I try to remind myself not to confuse these different types of silences too quickly. A difficult story may fail to speak to students because it has been framed in an unfamiliar way, but it may also produce discomfort because it's asking students to think in a way that their training so far has not yet rewarded. In that sense, resistance from medical students is not always a sign that the material has no value. Sometimes it's just a sign that the humanities has touched precisely the border of what medicine usually allows itself to ask. Medical education often teaches students explicitly and implicitly to ask, what is the use of this? How will it help me make a diagnosis? How will it help me manage a patient? Will it be in the exams? So when humanities materials enter that space, we arrive under pressure. We have to justify ourselves quickly. We have to prove that we are not decorative, not indulgent, not a pleasant break from real medicine. And this, I think, is one of the persistent tensions faced by medical humanities scholars who work in this environment, so in the medical education environment. The core question of my talk today is, how can medical humanities in Singapore engage medicine without becoming subordinate to its prevailing logics? While I take Singapore as my case here, I hope we can all think widely and broadly about how medical humanities becomes visible and justified within different institutional settings. My aim today is not to give a full history of medical humanities in Singapore, nor am I suggesting that Singapore is unique in all its tensions. What I want to do is describe a recurring difficulty in how medical humanities becomes visible, understandable, and valued, especially in settings where medicine is shaped by limited curricular time and clear demands for clinical relevance. To think about this, I draw on Johanna Shapiro's distinction between acquiescence and resistance. I find this helpful because it names a pressure that many of us may recognize. On one side, there is medical humanities work that fits easily into medical and institutional settings. On the other side, there is work that questions the assumptions through which medicine understands and authorizes itself. I think Professor Choi touched very briefly upon this in his presentation too. Thanks. Right. So in Singapore, as in many places, medical humanities often becomes easiest to recognize when it appears in curricular or program-based forms. It shows up in reflective practice, arts-based initiatives, or narrative medicine sessions. Much of this work is worthwhile. Some of it is excellent. At the same time, when these forms become the dominant public face of medical humanities, they can narrow what the humanities are understood to be for. One risk is that the humanities comes to be seen mainly as enrichment or support. In that form, it is welcomed because it softens medical training or helps professionals cope with pressure. These aims are important, yet when that becomes the settled account of the field, its critical and interpretive capacities become less visible and at times less welcome. I've come to this question partly through my own teaching at a medical school. In that setting, I have been fortunate to work with clinician educators who have been thoughtful, open, and genuinely supportive of medical humanities. At the same time, some of my materials have met with less enthusiasm from students. As mentioned earlier, it's often a very understandable response. If you are a highly pressured medical student trained to look for clinical relevance and examinable knowledge, a humanities session can easily seem like a detour from medical knowledge. I realized quite quickly that I was not having a uniquely Singaporean experience. The research literature has been telling us for some time now that medical humanities teaching often meets skepticism and resistance, especially when its clinical relevance is not made clear enough. In that sense, the tensions I'm describing may be recognizable beyond Singapore, even if they take different forms in Korea, Japan, China, and elsewhere in the region. So when students look at my carefully prepared materials as though I have somehow brought the wrong class into a room, I remind myself that this is a familiar feature of this interdisciplinary field. Of course, I take seriously the possibility that the materials may need revising. At the same time, I also take some comfort in the thought that such moments may signal a real encounter with intellectual discomfort. At the other end of the spectrum, what Shapiro would call resistance-oriented work asks sharper questions. So what I'm referring to is at the other end of the medical humanities spectrum. It examines how medicine establishes authority, how its categories are formed, and how some experiences become more legible than others. This work can be deeply revelatory. Yet, it is also the kind of work that is often received, especially in clinical or policy-facing settings, as oppositional or too abstract. What should interest us is not simply the existence of these two tendencies, acquiescence and resistance. It's the difficulty of living in the space between them in a way that does justice to medical humanities as an interdisciplinary field. If acquiescence becomes dominant, medical humanities risks becoming useful in ways that hollow out its distinctiveness. If resistance becomes detached from roots of engagement, it may remain intellectually strong while having little purchase on the institutional settings in which health and care are actually organized. The challenge then is how to describe medical humanities work in a way that keeps its critical force alive without reducing it to a service role, and that allows for engagement without giving up the field's sharper questions. At this point, it would be easy to tell a rather pessimistic story. We could say that medical humanities is always at risk of being domesticated by the institutions that invite them in. We could say that critique is always at risk of being dismissed as too abstract. I think all of that is partly true, but I don't think that's the whole story. Because the same tension that creates difficulty also creates possibility. The fact that medical humanities is pulled between accommodation, acquiescence, and critique, resistance, means that it can speak in more than one register. It can enter classrooms, hospitals, policy conversations, community spaces, and scholarly debates. It can ask what medicine does well, what it fails to see, and what forms of care might still be possible. So how might we describe the value of medical humanities in a way that is generous enough for collaboration, but strong enough to preserve critique? This is where I want to offer my three-part vocabulary: intellectual, practical, and relational contribution. I offer these terms as a heuristic, not as a fixed standard. My hope is that they can make medical humanities more legible both to itself and to others, while resisting the pressure to justify it through a single register of value. Before turning to that framework, let us stay for a moment with the Singapore context. Singapore is an especially interesting site for thinking about medical humanities because it brings together several conditions that intensify this tension between acquiescence and resistance. Medicine operates in Singapore within a highly organized and efficiency-conscious institutional environment. Professional education is rigorous and tightly structured. Health policy is often shaped by questions of performance, sustainability, and implementation. These conditions can create openings for the humanities, but they also place pressure on how the field presents itself. Under such conditions, work that can be translated into clear outcomes is easier to defend and easier to institutionalize. There are understandable reasons for this. Medical schools have limited curricular space. Clinicians and educators work under severe time pressure. Administrative structures tend to ask what a session is for, how does this fit an existing framework, and can it be evaluated qualitatively and quantitatively? So medical humanities often gains traction when it can be shown to do something recognizable institutionally. A large scoping review published in Academic Medicine in 2021 found that arts and humanities in medical education are used in many ways across the curriculum, though they are still often positioned as additive rather than intrinsic. That broader pattern helps explain why humanities teaching can be welcomed in principle while still be experienced by learners as peripheral. What becomes harder to articulate in such settings is that the humanities do not simply provide tools or outcomes, they also alter the terms of attention. They ask what counts as evidence, whose voice is heard, and how institutional habits shape moral perception. These are not decorative questions as they bear directly on how medicine understands itself. In Singapore, one consequence is that more accommodating forms of medical humanities can flourish precisely because they are compatible with existing institutional logics. Reflective writing can be accommodated as professional formation, narrative work can be embraced as communication training, well-being program can be justified as support for workforce resilience. Each of these may be valuable, but the terms of that welcome are significant. When the humanities are drawn in mainly as aids to better functioning, they can become too closely aligned with the system's need to produce more durable professionals. The risk is that the field becomes a companion to institutional endurance rather than a site for interrogation, questioning institutional assumptions. This is where Shapiro's category of resistance remains useful. Resistance doesn't have to mean refusal in a dramatic sense. It names a willingness to make visible what institutional common sense would prefer to leave unexamined. It shows that medicine is never only technical, it's also historical, rhetorical, ethical, political, and philosophical. So for scholars in the humanities and social sciences, this may seem almost self-evident. Yet within healthcare-facing environments, such work can be difficult to translate if critique is heard only as negation, or if theoretical language arrives without a clear sense of why and how does this matter to teaching, practice, and care. So critique can then be dismissed as admirable, but too remote, too abstract from clinical life. I don't think this problem is solved by asking resistance-oriented scholars to become more compliant, nor is it solved by asking institutionally engaged scholars to become more oppositional. In practice, most of us move across these positions. We teach in medical schools and ask critical questions about medicine. We collaborate with clinicians and still remain wary of being reduced to soft skills support. The issue, I think, is less where one stands in the abstract than how one frames the work. Part of what I have been looking for then is a way of talking about medical humanities that neither flattens it into institutional helpfulness nor leaves it stranded as critique addressed mainly to those already persuaded. My own teaching pushed this problem into view. If students experience the fields either as soft supplementation or as forbidding abstraction, then some of the work still to be done is conceptual. We need, as a medical humanities community, a vocabulary that can describe the field's contributions more fully and perhaps more persuasively without giving up what makes it distinct. This is where I think the question of intellectual, practical, and relational contribution can help. First, intellectual contribution. By this, I mean the field's role in shaping how medicine and health are understood. This includes the interpretive and critical work that clarifies the terms in which illness, care, evidence, and expertise are imagined. It includes showing that clinical categories have histories, that metaphors shape action, and that professional judgment cannot be reduced to rule following. Intellectual contribution concerns the frameworks through which medical reality is made knowable. To put this more concretely, when we ask students or healthcare professionals to read a patient narrative, a poem, a memoir, a film, or a historical account, we're not simply asking them to become more sensitive people, although that may happen. We are asking them to notice how meaning is made, Who is allowed to speak? What kind of suffering becomes recognizable? What metaphors organize the experience of illness? What is lost when pain is translated too quickly into a symptom, a score, or diagnosis? This is why the intellectual contribution of medical humanities is important. It slows down the movement from experience to category. It asks us to examine the forms of knowledge that medicine depends on rather than treating those forms as neutral. In a medical culture that often has to move quickly, this slowing down can look inefficient, but sometimes the quality of care depends precisely on the ability to notice what a dominant framework has made difficult to hear or see. Second, practical contribution. By this, I mean the field's role in shaping how care is enacted. This is the category many institutions recognize most readily and with good reason. Medical humanities can influence practice. It can offer better ways of listening, interpreting, and responding. It can create pedagogies that can change how stories are heard and how uncertainty is acknowledged. For example, a narrative exercise may not give a student a new clinical protocol, but it may help that student recognize when a patient is telling a story out of sequence. Because trauma, fear, shame, or uncertainty has disrupted the order in which events can be narrated. A discussion of visual art may not directly teach diagnosis, but it may train habits of looking, of attending to detail, of tolerating ambiguity before rushing to conclusion. And a historical case study may not tell us what to do tomorrow morning in clinic, but it may make us more alert to the afterlives of hierarchy, exclusion, and mistrust. These are practical effects, but they are not always easily measurable effects. They concern the formation of judgment, and judgment is one of the most important but least easily quantified dimensions of clinical life. And third, relational contribution. And I'm not saying empathy, this is relational. By this, I mean the field's role in shaping how relationships of care are formed, negotiated, and sustained. This includes clinician-patient relationships, though it also extends to relations among colleagues, across hierarchies, and between institutions and publics. I think this category is important because the relational is where many of the stakes of healthcare are actually lived, yet it is often treated as secondary to knowledge and technique. The humanities can show that care is always mediated by interpretation and relation. The relational field is where uncertainty is negotiated, where authority is exercised or softened, and where institutional values take form in ordinary encounters. This relational contribution may be the most difficult to measure, but in many ways it is the most immediately felt. For example, patients may not remember exactly what was said, but they remember how something was said. If intellectual contribution asks how medicine knows, and practical contribution asks how care is enacted, then relational contribution asks what kinds of human connection are made possible or impossible within our systems of care. This vocabulary also helps us name what medical humanities should avoid. It should avoid becoming merely ornamental, a poem before the real lecture begins, a painting used to soften the atmosphere, a reflective exercise that leaves the structures of training untouched. It should also avoid becoming merely therapeutic, as though the task of the humanities were to help individuals cope better with systems that may themselves need examination. But equally, it should avoid becoming so committed to critique that it loses the ability to speak across disciplines. If medical humanities only addresses those who already share its assumptions, then its critical force may remain intact. Transformative possibilities become limited. So this is the key point I want to make about the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration and translation. Now, the challenge is not to choose once and for all between service and critique. The challenge is to inhabit the space between them with skill and courage. Of course, I am very conscious that these three terms, intellectual, practical, and relational, do not resolve the tension between acquiescence and resistance. I don't think that tension can or should be resolved. Over time, I've come to understand it as constitutive of the field. Even so, the three orienting questions can help us move more deliberately within it. It asks us to resist the temptation to describe medical humanities through a single dominant lens, service or critique. It also gives us a language for institutional conversation that does not ask us to abandon the field's complexity. One can say to clinicians, educators, or administrators, this work has practical value, though its value does not end there. One can also say to humanities scholars that critique remains indispensable and that its significance may become more widely legible when we can describe its practical and relational consequences without diluting its force. What I am proposing then are three questions that generate a vocabulary of plurality. Plurality is a way of speaking about the field that protects it from being absorbed into institutional support functions, while also protecting it from becoming a discourse of purity in which engagement itself is treated with suspicion. To return then to Shapiro, acquiescence and resistance are two pressures that continue to organize how medical humanities is received and practiced. If we stay attentive to that tension, we may be better able to notice when the field is being welcomed on terms that are too narrow and when critique is being staged in ways that leave no room for uptake or transformation. My argument then is that medical humanities in Singapore and perhaps elsewhere too requires a fuller and more confident account of what it contributes. Medical humanities is important, not because healthcare professionals need a little more culture, not because literature or art can magically repair the pressures of contemporary medicine. The field is important because it gives us ways to think carefully when systems ask us to move quickly. It gives us ways to listen when institutional language becomes too smooth. It gives us ways to notice when care is present in name only, but lacking in practice. So I would not describe medical humanities as a field that simply makes medicine more humane. The formulation is too small. I would describe it as a field that asks what forms of knowledge, practice, and relationship make humane care possible in the first place. In Singapore and perhaps across Asia more broadly, this task is especially urgent because the field is still being formed. Its terms are not yet settled. Its institutional location is not fixed. Its future is still open, and I find this openness very exciting. We have the opportunity to build a medical humanities that is intellectually serious, practically engaged, and relationally attentive, a field that can collaborate without becoming subordinate, and more importantly, a field that can speak to medicine, but also beyond medicine, to patients, families, communities, educators, artists, policymakers, and publics. That, to me, is the promise of medical humanities, to stand as a partner to medicine, keeping alive the questions at the core of care, what medicine is for, what care requires, and what kinds of human relation our institutions can make possible when we attend together to the lived experiences of illness, suffering, and vulnerability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 이제는 그럼 이제 종합 토론 세션으로 가겠습니다.